super excited to have everyone here. So awesome, let's get started. So let me go ahead and advance to the next slide just to introduce everyone. So hi everyone, Joey again, really excited to have you here. Just wanted to say hi, hope everyone is staying well. If this is your first time joining us, as I mentioned, my name is Joey and I'm a design advocate over here at Figma. If you've tuned into our past webinars, welcome back. It's exciting to see, again, so many faces in chat today. We're really excited to have you here. Say hey, introduce yourself if you haven't already. Just make sure to set the toggle to all panelists and attendees. So today I'm really excited. We're going to be hearing from experts at Condé Nast, Harry's, and Shopify to hear more about how they create and maintain design systems across multiple brands. This is such a challenge, as we all know, and I'm really excited to hear from them and to learn a little bit more from their experience. So thank you both so much for coming on. Really, really excited. Finally, I just want to mention, feel free to use the chat, the Q&A chat through Zoom throughout the presentations today. As you have questions, let me know. I'll be monitoring it, and we'll be asking our speakers as we go and towards the end if we have time. If you're sitting there with a topic in mind, either for now or in the future, definitely let us know. Feel free to tweet us or tweet at me, and we just want these to be as useful and as entertaining and as we can right now with everything happening. So we really want to make sure we're bringing up topics that are interesting to all of you. I do want to mention this is being recorded, so we'll be sharing out the decks if we can after, as well as definitely the recording after. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, if you're not following us on Twitter, make sure to do that. That's where we'll definitely share all of those. Yeah, so for now, let's go ahead and get started. And thank you both so much for joining. I think we will have our third panelist, Mae, as well on the line very soon. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo. Pop yourself and share your screen as well.
Sure thing. Let me just start here. All right. So what I'm going to do, everyone, is I'm going to start broad, and we're going to be talking about design systems in general. Mason will then take over and begin to share a bit more granularity around design systems with a bit more practical information. So in every corner of the earth, we find some of the largest and oldest living systems on earth, our forests. What makes a forest a resilient and flexible system is that it is as aware of its structure as the purpose that it fulfills, and as a result, it can modify its behavior. A forest is a system that understands the elements, the interconnections, and the purpose that it fulfills. And this makes a forest a system that is extremely aware, as I just mentioned. A forest's deep connected roots have allowed it to survive millennia of fires, droughts, climate shifts, diseases. In some of our backyards, we find the most flexible and resilient systems known to us. Now, before we dig deeper, we need to first understand the definition and the anatomy of a system. A system is an interconnected set of elements coherently organized in a way that it achieves something. Now, lucky for us, we don't have to look far to look at successful systems. A system is really any set of things, people, cells, molecules, whatever, really interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern of behavior over time. And that's the important part. Take forest fires, for example. Now, during intense fires, the organism survives underground with its root system sending up new stems in the aftermath of each wildfire. By understanding the structure of its root system, a forest is able to withstand fires by changing its behavior after the fire has been consumed. The purpose of a system is to solve problems and create desirable futures with less side effects. And we can actually begin to take that into effect in how not just the system behaves, but how a design system can behave. Before we can peer into the future, however, we need to first understand the anatomy of a system. Systems are comprised of a finite amount of elements, like leaves, for example. These elements contain interconnections, pathways which allow each element to associate itself to one another. Let's call them branches. And lastly, elements and interconnections define the system's purpose, the third and most important component in a system. Something really special to systems, and where I think we have the biggest capacity for positive change, is to consider that systems can be actually nested within systems. Therefore, there can be purposes within purposes. Another example, the purpose of a hospital, we can all agree, is to care and preserve life, right? So within the hospital, the purpose of a nurse might be to provide the best care possible. The purpose of a researcher might be to find groundbreaking evidence. And the purpose of an administrator might be to balance the hospital's budget. Any of these sub-purposes could come into conflict with the overall purpose, which is to care and preserve life. The nurse could stop showing up at work, the researcher might ignore relevant data, and the administrator might balance the budget by firing nurses. Keeping sub-purposes and overall system purposes in harmony is an essential function of any successful system and design system, of course. Now, as you set out to either build or maintain your design system, always ask yourselves, am I creating a subsystem within a system, a local system within a global system? And if so, are all purposes aligned and in harmony? Now, as you know, I work at Shopify, but more specifically, I work in the Shopify retail team. Our vision for retail is to empower entrepreneurs to bring communities together through in-person commerce. Now, that's our vision. And we work on designing experiences to empower merchants to sell products through physical spaces, such as brick and mortar stores or pop-up shops. The latest product, which is a perfect reflection of this, is the all-new POS. The all-new POS was completely rebuilt and redesigned specifically for brick and mortar stores. However, we didn't just create a new app. We actually created a new design system alongside it, one that would elevate the purpose of retail. Polaris for Admin was designed for different contexts and audiences that we designed for in retail. Retail users are diverse brick and mortar merchants. Some of them own retail stores, some of them participate in pop-ups, and some others do both at the same time. These environments are different from what an online merchant might use. They might sit at a desk, for example, reviewing and monitoring the health of their online store. At home, in an office, it is a different context altogether. A brick and mortar merchant, on the other hand, is more likely to be in a constant state of movement in a perpetually shifting environment, like the one that we're in right now. As an example, larger than average tap targets not only help merchants who are usually at arm's length from a device, because these devices are sometimes anchored in a desk or in a table, but these large tap targets also help them fulfill local pickups quickly and reliably. Large tap targets encourage a merchant to maintain eye contact with their customer as we promote muscle memory throughout the app wherever possible. Another thing that we explored within our local system, the system of Shopify for our Polaris for retail, is how to change our tone of voice. Our merchants' livelihoods depend on this app that you see working. They process critical sales through the POS app, and if the app goes down, they can't make sales in person anymore. As a result, the visual tone and the language of Polaris for retail has a more formal tone, whereas something that you see in your back office software could be more uplifting with delightful illustrations and microcopy. Throughout our research, we found out that retail merchants are looking for something that works, period. In design, the latter presents itself as a pragmatic, no-nonsense system, one that channels feelings of confidence and conviction for those who use it. Now, for all the differences that this local system shows, it is as tightly connected to the global Polaris design system as ever. And that is what we talk about, a purpose within a purpose. Though the Polaris global system and the Polaris for retail local system look different from each other, they're joined together by that purpose. This is what we refer to as building effective system of systems. Both of them are aligned in producing their own pattern of behavior over time with that same purpose. Now, a purpose of a design system in general is to scale opinions and decisions across an organization. Even though we are designing for different contexts, different environments, and different audiences, as you can see here, our purpose is the same, to make commerce better for everyone. The way that we achieve it might be different. The way that these elements, the leaves, end up manifesting and looking like will look different, of course, but deep inside, these are systems that are as connected by their purpose as ever. The root system, the underground system of the forest that you cannot see, that is where the connections happen. Now, this at times can be harder than it looks. When creating a local system, one always needs to ensure that it aligns with the foundations of the global system. The way that we achieved it in retail was by being in constant conversation with the creative directions team from Polaris, who are in charge of ensuring the purpose of Polaris remains aligned as we create local systems. This gave us both agency and the confidence that we needed to be able to innovate beyond what's in Polaris and what was already there, really. Having the rationale behind why we need to diverge from the main system helped us gain momentum. We found that out through our research with our merchants. And we now feel very confident about this local system and the value it's going to bring to the audience that we're designing for. If we hadn't done this merchant research, we simply would have been guessing. We would have created a system with assumptions alone. And that is a system that cannot really sustain itself in the long term. Perhaps one of the biggest benefits you can draw from creating an ecosystem of global and local systems is that a local system is able to influence the global system, wielding it forward. Polaris for Retail has been able to contribute back to Polaris and encourage growth for both systems simultaneously. A great example of this has been our color modes. When we started designing for Polaris for Retail, Polaris itself had only been using a light color mode. The lighting conditions, however, in a merchant's retail store vary so much that we needed to ensure proper color mode for contrast and accessibility, which led us to ship the initial release of our app using a dark color mode. As we became more knowledgeable on how to design dark color modes, Toby, one of our staff designers, collaborated closely with the Polaris team on bringing a dark color mode to the global design system. This is a perfect example of how a local system can enhance, evolve, and inform the global counterpart. Because we were the first local system at Shopify, we needed in a way to pave the way for others in our company to understand the value of a local system. We worked with the Polaris team to further reinforce the latter, and with their support, we've been able to truly begin forming that meaningful and purposeful local design system within Shopify, hopefully for years to come. Now, there is a risk if we stop observing our systems at play. If we don't focus on the right places, poor structure begins to lead to poor behavior. Any focus away from that North Star, even by a little, can end up a subsystem in a vastly different place than its global counterpart. That is why we need to continue to observe and evaluate the local design system and how it relates to the global design system, to the forest, if you will. I think that is the tension that I feel, at least with design systems. As a person that is working on creating, maintaining, and updating a design system at Shopify, I feel like we run the risk of getting too caught up in the elements of a design system, the leaves, and we miss the forest from the trees, myself included. As designers tasked with building design systems, we should be reframing our mental model of what constitutes a system. A system is not a set of objects. It's not a set of buttons, components, fields. A system is a set of intended behaviors. What do we want to get out of the system? What behaviors do we want to promote? We should be focused on promoting those behaviors we wish to see in a system and not square our focus on these elements alone, on the leaves. Now, behaviors are complex and also speak to the relationship between us and the world around us. Many of the things that we design today are nested behaviors, very complex systems. We're constantly building our own forests. That is why it is imperative for us to observe. We run a huge risk if we don't look at the people using our system, observe the behavior of its system at play, both the designers that use our system, but also the end users of our system, in our case, our merchants. Watch how it breaks in order to reinvent it. Systems allow you to find agility and decision-making amid a familiar and rapidly changing environment. And I think a lot of us make the mistake of believing that a complex system is a complete system. We're wrong. Effective systems around us have proven that simplicity is a key to longevity. We think that complexity equals resilience. I also believe that we're wrong. This is not true in biology as it isn't true in the systems that we build. The answer to complexity isn't simplicity, it is transparency. Design systems need to do just that. They might not offer necessarily a simple view of the world, but they should offer a transparent one. Think of yourselves in a forest. A forest is as transparent as possible. It doesn't hide anything. A modular design system is one that enables the end user to see all variations of that design system. Now, we need to design systems opinionated enough to withstand wildfires, but flexible enough to weather the changes in temperature. And I really want to focus on observation as a key aspect of any design system that you build, whether it's be a global one or a local one. We create systems and we often treat them as museum pieces, beautiful artifacts that hint at the future, and we become afraid of ruining them. I think a messy system is healthy, a confused system is healthy as well, because those two qualities ensure that your system never breaks as long as their purpose remains aligned. Thinking in systems allow us to build for impact, influence, output, and quality. However, I think the work is on us to make sure that these systems are opinionated, flexible, and future-proof. So observe the system in order to evolve it and understand the patterns of behavior. You're not going to continue building the forest if you don't understand first the purpose that it fulfills. There's a great quote by an urban designer, Ben Hamilton Bailey. He said, "If we observed first and designed second, we wouldn't need half of the things that we build." I think that is true with design systems. I actually think it's true, of course, in design as more now than ever. Thank you so much.
Ricardo, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I feel like I might not be alone when I say how much I love the tree, forest, and leaf metaphors that you use. That's I feel like, as someone mentioned, super calming right now.
Oh yeah.
That was
Thanks.
great. Yeah, so I have a couple of questions if it's okay to ask. I would love to learn a little bit more about like what the user testing process looked like to kind of test the point of sale app with merchants, and maybe if you can dive into that a little bit more. I know for a lot of folks on here might be at smaller startups, and for some might be at companies with a lot more resources. And I'm definitely just curious to learn a little bit more about what the experience was like, and if you have any tips to share.
For sure. For us, getting as close to ethnographic research was meant the world to us. We were in a lucky position. We are in a lucky position that we can actually go to a place and see our merchants at play. We would go to merchant stores. We would visit them for a day, and we would see how their world looked like in context of their store. Some stores were extremely messy. Some of them were incredibly organized. Some of them were run by one person. Others were run by teams of 20 people. Having that the flexibility of going to a merchant store, seeing them just be a fly on the wall was really helpful for us. Another thing that was really helpful was to test the design system in context of the core flow that a merchant performs, and that is checking out a product. So we would test the design system based on that core flow. We didn't find it helpful or effective to get feedback with, just showing them, I don't know, a UI kit of buttons and fields and line items. Obviously, that is not the way to test a design system. A way to test it, a good way to test it is to test the core flow of your product and iterate on that core flow, explore the design system with that one core flow. And that is exactly what we did. So we would visit merchant stores and we would ask them to use our prototype, an iPad, and go through go do a checkout, like a process a sale using a credit card is what we would say. And we would see the design system at play. We would evaluate the information architecture, the content hierarchy, and of course the design system as well.
Such a good answer. Again, thanks for sharing that. So this next question is from David Cruz, and he asked, how do you keep the vision or purpose still relevant as you build a subsystem that can lead to, of course, inconsistent principles that might or might not conflict with the that like original vision or purpose that you had?
That's a wonderful question to ask, and it's I guess it looks easy. It's not easy whatsoever. What we needed to do was to, the way that I did it, at least personally, was to tie it in a story and to be as vocal as possible about the needs of retail to other people in the company. We early last year, we did what we called road shows, where we would showcase our design system, but not just that, why we felt we needed a new design system, a local design system. And we talked to as many people at Shopify as we could, getting both feedback, but also alignment of other stakeholders, other groups. And if we had created this local system in a silo with our own team, this would not have been, it would, of course, would have failed, because we need the output and we need the input, from the entire company. It is not easy. I think that the answer that I would give to that is constant communication and constant alignment on what is the narrative that you are trying to sell. For us, it's easy. Of course, we want to make commerce better for everyone. That is the purpose of Shopify as a whole. But for us, we want to empower retail merchants, brick and mortar merchants to be able to make their communities better. So by creating that North Star, aligning to that North Star, communicating it, and finding new ways of expressing that intent allowed us to move that process forward. Easier than, of course, if we had done it just by ourselves.
I have just a couple more questions. This is also interesting to hear, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. So Karam Sewer asked if your engineering team built the front end framework from scratch, or how did your engineering team collaborate with you all as you built this?
Yeah, so we did build it from scratch. We borrowed quite a bit from Polaris. However, for example, text fields are using Polaris. We just styled it a little bit different to reflect Polaris for retail. Some other parts are brand new. For example, the smart grid, one of the screens that I showed you with tiles, that is of course brand new to any system that we have at Shopify. So we needed to create it from scratch. We always made sure, even at the beginning in the explore phase, that we were just trying to figure out what to do as we reimagined and we rebuilt POS, we had engineers, 2 or 3 engineers at the beginning, just making sure that our decisions from a UX perspective were sound. They could be replicated in code easily. We also worked with UX developers to make sure that the system that we were building could be scalable in the future, making sure that we were thinking on a systems level perspective, not just from a design lens, but also from an engineering lens, creating something scalable, replicable, and something that, of course, can be maintained for the long term. That is, I think, the beauty, the blessing and the curse of a design system is the maintainability, the evolution of it. You need to continue to evolve it, and that's why I said it right at the end. You cannot have a system that simply just stays there forever. That, like any human being, a human being evolves their preferences, their likes, their dislikes. We need to treat that design system as a living thing. So we were often iterating, but thankfully we did have the collaboration of engineers that allows us to do that really easily nowadays.
So there are so many questions coming in. I do want to share that one thing that we'll do is I'll put together a doc of the questions that we didn't get to and share it with our presenters today. And if you all are able to, we'll definitely like to include more answers just to make time and to ensure that everyone can see. So I have just one more question that might be a good one to end on, Ricardo. So Emma Campbell is wondering, this is something that I wonder a lot about too, especially at a company as large as Shopify. Do you have any tips on or advice on how you were able to communicate effectively with the other teams within the company, just in terms, to create the actual design system of Polaris or for Polaris? I know this is something that as the company grows, that challenge only kind of increases, and I'm curious if you ran into anything that really helped there, or if you had to do it again, maybe what tips would you share with others?
2 things I think we did well, looking back, was we ran 2 design sprints. Those 2 design sprints gave us the blueprint for everything. We ran a design sprint for creating, of course, the structure of point of sale. We aligned on what were the new features that we wanted to surface, how we wanted to reinvent this app. We did that with a multidisciplinary group of people, PMs, engineers, content strategists, designers, all in one room for 4 days a week. We also ran another one very, very closely after with the creative directions team, whereas the first design sprint, we focused primarily on structure, on features, on storyboarding, flows. On the second one, we focused on voice, on tone, on language, and that is where we created alignment on how the global system could differ from the local counterpart. For example, Polaris for retail needs to be serious, formal, reserved. We talked about why in the presentation. Polaris or Shopify as a brand is a bit more expressive, more joyful. So aligning early was incredibly helpful. As a technique, I always use storytelling. I don't know if people in the call are knowledgeable about the hero's journey. There's a book called Game Storming. Buy it. Just buy it. It's an amazing book. It gives you so many creative exercises to ideate. There's one of them called Hero's Journey. I always frame when I facilitate, I always frame our days as an adventure. We are here. We have a call to adventure. We're going to get help. We have research. It's going to feel terrible. We're going to hit the pit. It's going to feel like we cannot move forward. But don't worry. We will gain new powers, and we will come back with the world bearing gifts. That storytelling framework in my career has always allowed me to gain alignment and perspective from many people. So that's what I would probably answer. Look up The Hero's Journey. It's really wonderful.
Ricardo, if I can ever answer a question half as good as the answers that you just gave, my life would look a lot different. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I also just want to give a shout out to Mae Capozzi, who just joined from Harry's. Thank you so much for bearing with us, Mae. We had a couple of Zoom issues, so I'm really excited to hear your presentation and know that it'll work out. But for now, Mason, I want to turn it over to you. So Mason's from Condé Nast, and I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more. But yeah, thank you, Ricardo. Welcome, Mason, and glad to have you here as well, Mae.
Great. Yeah, I'll just introduce myself as I share my screen here. I am I work for Condé Nast as a designer slash developer. I'm one of a couple of hybrid people there, based in Philadelphia. But Condé Nast is spread, pretty much all over the world. We have home bases in New York and in London and many other, people spread around. And we have, well, actually, my next slide addresses, there we go, kind of who we are. So Condé Nast, if you're not aware, is a publisher that publishes a lot of brands that you probably are aware of. So we do The New Yorker, Vogue, GQ, Wired, Pitchfork, Epicurious, and many, many others, and not just in the US, but also in many markets around the world. So we have Vogue Paris and Vogue China and Russia and Mexico. So we have to support all of these different brands and all of those different markets. And all of these brands have different looks and feels, and they have different voices. And even if it's still Vogue, there's a difference between Vogue in the US versus any of these other places. So we have a lot of things to support, and it would be impossible to do that with many different design systems or content management systems. So we need to find a way to support that much variety with one system whenever possible. So we do that with a couple of different large tools, and we get into a lot of granularity with these tools. The first is our component system. And our components, if you're unaware, components are the pieces that you might see building up a web page. So we have modular adaptable components that flex to the needs of multiple brands and markets, and we assemble these components into pages. So think of our navigation as a component, or the card that has an image and a headline as a component, and we'll see an example of that in a minute. And then also our brand identities, which would be sets of styling information specific to a brand that handle color, typography, and other things like decorations. And this is where we store things like basically our token system. And tokens, if you're unaware of the term, is a way for us to associate a value with a name. And we'll talk about that again in a minute. So to our component system. So we're looking at a card that has an image, and it has a category. So this is books, and then a headline, and then an author. And our components that should all serve a unique and clear purpose. I don't want to have many different components that do this thing. This thing is allowing us to know that, okay, well, if I click this, I'm going to get into an article. I don't need to have a lot of those. I want to have one of those that we can shape in many different ways. So we use configurations and variations to kind of achieve these differences. So in the first one, we're looking at our more basic one where we've got an image on top and the text below it takes up a rectangle. And in the second one, with some configuration, we've centered the text and nudged it up overlaying onto the image a little bit, which gives us just a different look and feel. Same content, different look and feel. And then finally, we've got one where we've gotten rid of the white background and we're overlaying the text on top of the image. And that gives us another look and feel. And we can mix and match some of these things to achieve more. I'm showing three, but there are a lot more variety that we do. And one brand might choose one of these layouts, another brand might choose another. And that gives, some variety between how Vogue or GQ or somebody else might want to present the same function. We could go in a lot more detail, but I think that I wanted to get more into what we do for our brand identity and our token system. So just to orient ourselves, this is how we represent what we call brand identities in our workspace in Figma. So I've got an example of some of our color tokens and then some of our text tokens. And let's drill down a little bit on the next couple of slides. So a brand identity is a collection of these tokens, each with a defined role in the website. I've seen other design systems that use tokens, and they might not have to cover so much of a breadth of purpose as ours does. So they might have a token that is the brand's blue or the brand's green. But because we have to serve so much, we have a token called standard.prominent text that is applied to all of the prominent typography across the site. So in this case, that maps to a black. And that way we know that any time we use this token, we're going to get that color, and another brand might choose a different color. And that way we get some variety in how our brands work. And as far as what is stored in the token, for color, it's just an RGBA value. It's pretty simple. A name maps to a color. And for typography, same philosophy. Editorial headline 1 is a token that applies to all of the prominent typography. But this time, instead of color, we're talking about typographic characteristics. So, and it's not just one value, it's the font size, the line height, the letter spacing, all of those things that go into defining the typography, except for the color. And we also support different responsive aspects. So, well, not all of our tokens are going to resize. Our body text doesn't, but our headlines often do. And so as we have it mapped out in this worksheet, our headline 1 is going to have 3 different variations at different breakpoints, but headline 2 has 2. And this is how we've adjusted our system over time to give our system some typographic flexibility and expression, but not overwhelm our system so much that, say, we're making sure that every piece of our text can be large at a large screen. And what we've been looking at so far have been the colors and type associated with what we call our default brand identity. And really, this is a brand identity that is consumed by no brands at all. This is brandless, or white label. And this is how we design a component that could be used everywhere. So we'll design a component that uses these tokens and these colors and assemble that, and then we'll apply another brand. So in another worksheet for Vogue, for example, we've changed our type characteristics and we've changed our color values, and we can put those together to create that variety for a different brand. We'll take a second and look at how we apply those tokens. Since we've migrated all of our, well, as we're in the process of migrating all of our designs into Figma, when we're using this system, we can save those values as color styles and text styles. And so within Figma, on that headline, we've applied editorial headline 1 and standard prominent text to that headline. And those are just type and color styles from Figma that we've applied to that text. And here it is. We've got a kind of a mock-up of a page with a navigation and a content header. And if we apply the Vogue brand, we'd get Vogue colors and Vogue typography, but with the same tokens. And for GQ, same thing. We get different colors, different type, but the same tokens. And we can just kind of look at those again: brandless, Vogue, and GQ. And this lets us have that one kind of like, system that we can always get to and remember that, oh, well, if it's prominent text, if it's a headline, it'll be these things. And then we apply a new brand to it. And so that's how we do it within the design app. But how does the app work with these tokens? And our sites are run with JavaScript, and JavaScript works really well with JSON. And JSON is a very editable file format. So our apps rely on these tokens as defined in JSON as the source of truth. It would be complex and unnecessary to have our apps reach all the way into our design app. So what we've done is let our designers and engineers who need to work with these files use Figma as the workshop. And we've created a plugin that will be able to go through those token sheets and export JSON values, but then also take a JSON file and slurp those up and put those into a Figma file. Which brings me to what I want to show you in practical terms. So let me switch over to the next tab. And let's look at one of our actual brand identity files. So we've got our cover, just lets us know where we are, and our color identity page, which is the colors available to a brand. And our brands can have as many colors as necessary. So if a brand needs very few or a lot, we allow them to kind of expand this as necessary. And then our token sheets. And we've got, in this case, we've got 2 different themes. We've got our standard theme and our inverted theme. Occasionally, a brand will need extra themes, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute too. And then for each of these themes, I'll zoom in a little bit to a page. We've got type colors and UI colors for backgrounds and graphics, and interactive colors for buttons and form elements and so on. And the exact same tokens are in use in a different theme. The actual tokens per theme are identical. We've got a type identity page, which catalogs which fonts are in use. This is for designer reference. And a type tokens page, zoom out on that. And we have it split into some categories and subcategories. So editorial tokens, utility tokens, zooming in. We've got our headline tokens that we looked at. We've got descriptive styles for things like subheadlines, paragraph styles for different purposes there. We do a lot of variety in our typesetting, so we want to account for a lot of things here. And then finally, we have a page for decoration tokens, which in all honesty is a new work in progress for us, where we're talking about how to tokenize things like border radius and the width and length of different lines that we use in our design system. So let's go over to type tokens, and I want to edit one. Zoom on that. And so how we use it is we just drill in on something, and we're using a Figma text style, and so I'll edit that. And let's say I want to change this to use one of our New Yorker fonts. So I'm going to use probably our most identifiable font. There we go. And so as a designer would work through this, they would also edit these out. But I'm going to leave it here, just this one piece of text edited. And I'm going to run our plugin. Got a number of different flavors of it that we use internally, but here's the one that works for this file. And I'll just click on the export tab and click export. And so that gives us this JSON. I'll take it out of this little window where we can see it. Sit here. And this is what our app sees. We've got a place for our colors, our palettes, and then where we would associate a particular token. So inverted backdrop uses black 800. Scroll down to text. There we go. We've got a token for footer description that has case, family, the variety, the font size, and italics, all of these things that go into how we describe our type. This wouldn't be a good demo if I didn't pre-bake something. So let's take the color, the typography that we just exported, copy that, and paste that into another file where I've made a few changes already. So I've taken the colors that existed for bright red and paprika and made them more purpley. And I've created a new palette, a new color theme for special. And I've applied some of those colors. Oh, and I created a mint cream color that I'm setting as the background. So I'll grab all of that, copy it, and come over to this next Figma file. And I'll zoom out a little bit on here so I think we'll see the change a little bit clearer. Run the plugin again. And this time flip over to the import tab. Paste and import. And there we go. And now I'll just have to reposition these a little bit, sloppily for the moment. And we've got this special theme with a mint background set to that background color and those more purpley tones. But also, since I changed those tones globally, those purpley tones are used here too. And this lets us stand up a new brand or a new market incredibly quickly, and then intuitively within a design app that we're all comfortable with, make those changes to color or typography, and then get those as quickly as possible back into our actual web apps. So let's just work really quickly and really have a smooth handoff between designers and engineers, and be able to show things off to product people. Which brings me to, if there's time, I have one more quick thing I wanted to demo here.
Yeah, please.
We looked at this a minute ago. This is that mock-up of a navigation with a content header. Because these tokens are using Figma styles for color and typography, we're able to map those to these brand identities and be able to swap them. So I can use another plugin that we developed called the Brand Swapper, patent pending, I guess, on the name, and be able to have a drop down between all the brands that have been able, well, in this flavor of the brand identity, been able to work with it. So I'll switch from default to Vogue US. There's a big difference there, and just hit submit. And be able to really quickly, live in Figma, be able to switch between the tokens, the token values for each of these things that have been set. So we get new colors, we get new typography, and we can do that for all of our brands. GQ, see the differences between Vogue Germany and Vogue US. And this lets a designer really smoothly be able to stress test their work. This lets us be able to quickly put together mock-ups with different components composited out into a layout and see how those would work with different brands and send those to, you know, our product people and our editors and, you know, and all of our stakeholders, and be able to get some confidence in what's coming out of the design system that we would want to roll off into our live sites. That's where I wanted to end it. So yeah, Joey, if you wanted to take it or give me questions or whatever.
I mean, Mason, looking at chat, the top emoji was the fire emoji. The top word was magical, and the secondary word was next level. So that was pretty awesome. Also, you're really brave and kind for doing a live demo like that, but I think that was really helpful to see. You know, it's so interesting, of course, to hear about everything, but to also see like the inner workings of it. That was, well, yeah, that was pretty great. So thank you.
Oh, that's really great. That's awesome to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Demo went well. So I do want to be a little bit conscious on time now that we know that Mae is here, but I do want to ask a couple of questions if that's all right. So let's see. So I'm curious if you could talk maybe a little bit about like just general maintainability. I know that's something that always comes up, and it does seem like a challenge at times. And I'm curious, you know, based on what you've shown, if you've run into any problems around maintainability, or if you have any advice for people who aren't quite at this level, but are, you know, still in the inner workings of Figma, if you have any advice there, would just love to hear it.
Let's talk about maintainability, and if I drift off and forget the second half, just let me come back to it.
Sure.
Yeah, so we've been on a journey with this. We did start with multiple content management systems and design systems for every brand. About 2.5 or 3 years ago, we came together and tried to put all of the US brands into one design system, which became the one that is in place for most of our brands live today. Most pages and sections of our brands are using that. And then some time ago, year and a half ago, what was two companies, Condé Nast and Condé Nast International, merged. And so we had our US design system and our international design system, which were developed similarly, but not perfectly compatibly, you know, have to run together and figure out a way to make all of these things work together. So I've been on that mission for the last year, how to not be, to knit together all of the different pieces from these two systems. And we're still in that process. So the complexity of like decisions made for one system and another system, and decisions made that are improvements and simplification on all of those systems, you know, that leads to a fair amount of complexity. What we do is we basically just try to, you know, take it a problem at a time. We might look at the names chosen for a section of our tokens and figure out what's more intuitive. Something that we ran into when we started to work with international development teams is everyone speaks enough English to do web development, but they may not know as English as a first language. And so we wanted to make sure that all of the token names work really well for somebody, you know, who knows what a headline is, but not be, you know, in a place to know what the particular content strategy is behind one of our older, more lengthy content editorial headline, something. So that kind of gave us a bit of a perspective to think that like, okay, this is a place where we can simplify. And we've identified a bunch of other places like that. But then what was the second part of the question? I knew I'd forget.
Totally okay. I was really just curious if you had questions or if you had advice around, for companies who aren't quite at this level, or for designers who aren't quite at this level, if you had any advice just to give them around general, maintainability as it kind of points to Figma and as it comes to working with developers and just keeping these things updated as you go.
Absolutely. So start with the problems that you have. So where I began with this work was way before I came to Condé Nast. I was working in doing agency work, and we would have a client come in that needed some new website or web app turned around fairly quickly. And the problem that I had was, somehow to be able to get the design thinking that I was, working with, but without the time to really hone in on that as it applies to every new client that came in. So over time, I worked out maybe a way to do shorthand for CSS styling, or maybe shorthand way to create components that were flexible enough. And those things, in an agency perspective, let us have a library of options that we could have as our kind of first draft for client work. And as we kind of worked on, say, maybe the first draft got us 60% of the way to what we needed to do, we would add to our system, and that would help us be in a better place for the next client that would come through. And that was how I started thinking with design systems for multiple brands and purposes. Perhaps you're in a product shop and you don't have multiple brands, you don't have multiple purposes. You really can start with like, okay, how do I associate a purpose with a value, and just do that end of it. Maybe it's colors, maybe it's typography, and that way you can see that, well, maybe maybe our system has been overdoing it, or there's too many font sizes, or there's too many colors. And by settling on a set of names and values, that gives you some perspective on how complex or overly complex your design system might currently be.
Mason, that was so wonderful. There are so many questions coming in, and like I said, we'll kind of collect those and share them on after for as much as our panelists have time. But thank you so much. That was an amazing demo, and just really appreciate all of the advice that you offered there. It was really cool to see.
Awesome.
So we still have about close to 500 with us. So I'm really excited, Mae, to turn it over to you next. Would love for you to introduce yourself, and you should have the ability to share your screen. And really excited to hear everything you've been up to.
Awesome, great, Mason. That was really cool. That was super cool. We are not quite there yet, but we are trying to get there too. So that's awesome. All right, let me just go ahead and share my screen really quickly.
Mason just raised the bar for all of us.
Yeah. All right, can people see my screen? Can you see my presentation? Awesome.
Yeah, we can.
Cool. And let me do this. Great. So I'm going to take it into a little more of the engineering side of things, a little bit even further than Mason took it, because I am a software engineer on the Harry's Design Systems team. My name is Mae Capozzi. Just in case you want to reach out to me after this, some things we could talk about are coding. I like a nice glass of bourbon, and I really like riding my bike. And I am blogging at maecapozzi.com all the time. So if you want to chat, you can reach me. And so I work for Harry's Inc. Just to give a little background, we support 2 DTC brands currently. We have Harry's, which is our men's personal care brand, and Flamingo, which is our women's personal care brand. And we have a goal to develop and support many more e-commerce brands. So we're not quite as big as Condé Nast, but we are working on it. And so wanting to support multiple brands like this kind of introduces 2 core problems to like a front-end team. One problem is, how do we actually share front-end UI components between brands that have totally different designs? And also, like, how do we build new and delightful and well-designed and robust DTC experiences in under a month, so really quickly? And so not only do we need to kind of work together to, or not only do we need to build out all these components and make sure that they function well and are well tested and are easy to implement and version and all of these kind of like engineering concerns, we need to do it as quickly as we can. And so basically, like, I'm sure that part of the reason that a lot of you came here is because you're having the same problems. You're trying to build a multi-brand design system. You're not sure where to start. And like, unfortunately, I really don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all solution. I think that it really depends on the size of your team, the amount of investment that your company wants to put into a design systems team, how involved your creative teams are in the project. So I can't really give you a solution, but I can share like a philosophy or a concept that I often use to kind of help guide our design systems team as we create these systems that we want to how we want a lot of different brands to leverage. And so that idea is called progressive disclosure of complexity. So progressive disclosure is a concept that actually comes from design, and it describes when a designer defers advanced or rarely used features to a secondary screen, making applications easier to learn and less error prone. So the idea there is that we don't want to, so the idea there is that like when somebody first comes to your site, you don't want to show them every single possible setting that they can use. You want to make sure that they see the default and the common functionality. And then as they become more advanced users of your system, they can opt into more complexity and use some more of the advanced features. So as I was researching multi-brand systems and just generally reading about engineering, I read Jason Langsdorff's blog post. It's called Automation Control, Progressive Disclosure of Complexity. And he writes about how you can apply the concept of progressive disclosure to engineering. So the core idea there is that you really want to allow your users to trade complexity for flexibility. And he writes, with well-designed layers, people only opt out of the default decisions that need to be changed. This gives them full control while still keeping as much of the complexity as possible abstracted away. So if we can kind of step back and think about this idea of trading complexity for flexibility, you want to architect your system in layers. So you want to provide same defaults to your consumers. You want to give them the feature sets that they need right out of the box. But once they need something a little bit more flexible, a little bit different, a little bit more complicated, you don't want to make them eject out of your system. You don't want them to have to leave and build something totally custom. Instead, you want to make sure that you've built your system in layers so that they can take on more complexity in order to gain more flexibility. So I wanted to kind of talk through how we actually do this at Harry's, and what kind of these layers are and these levels are that we use to build our component library and our design system. So, and our component library being kind of like a subset of our larger design system. So level 1 would be base components, which are the smallest possible building block. So these usually have very generic designs. They have overridable styles, and they can read design tokens. So if you actually look at this image on the left, like Mason was talking about design tokens, talking about how you can kind of swap the design tokens in Figma. So and he was saying that they were starting to explore border radius, and they'd already explored text color, for example, or colors and typography. So these are examples of the types of tokens that we can change in our design system. So border radius is an example, font color, borders. So we are actually applying those same concepts using a script as well to apply them actually directly into our component library. So then the next level that we use are layout components. So this is level 2 of that system. And these are combinations of base components. So because we're in e-commerce, or because we have many e-commerce brands, we often want to do functionality like adding to cart. So we would have a quantity selector with a button. That's very common. So these are our 2 base components that we've combined to make a layout component. And this can also read design tokens. And then finally, the level 3 would be a starter kit. So we have a design starter kit, which lives in Figma, and then a complementary engineering starter kit that uses the components that are in Figma to build out a full guest checkout flow with like a home page, a product display page, a cart, a checkout. And these pages are made out of combinations of layout components. And so I kind of want to walk through like how a product manager and a designer and a developer would work through these layers and like why they might opt out of the top level and into some of the lower levels. And so the idea there is that we move from least complex and least flexible. So that's just opting directly into the starter kit to most complex, most flexible, which would be building everything from scratch. So if we start with the least complex and least flexible option, that's a case where the product manager is really happy with the default starter kit. They like what's been designed in what we call the generic brand, which is what I'm showing you here. This t-shirt brand. We don't have a t-shirt brand. This is just our generic brand. So yeah, so this is when the PM is happy with the defaults. They like the guest checkout experience. They don't want to spend a lot of time, effort, money on customizing the brand at this time. So they just tell the designer, okay, just put the colors, put the typography into our design starter kit. And then we use our scripts that we use to sync with Figma to pull the design tokens into our engineering starter kit, which then like basically themes and brands that code base. So then let's say that, you know, that brand has been live for a couple weeks and we find that we're not really happy with the conversion rate. We're not happy with how often users are adding to cart. So the PM thinks, okay, let me customize the product display page. I want to make it easier for users to figure out how to add a product to their cart. But I don't really want to spend a lot of money or time building like new components, right? So then that's when the designer might start to rearrange the layout components. Maybe they change the columns. Maybe they move the quantity selector and button up a little bit so that it's not below the fold. And then the developer can just do the same thing. We use React, so it's really easy to take React components and just shuffle them around. Now let's say that maybe conversions improved a bit, but the product manager realizes that it's really hard for users to really understand how to use the product. So like if we're selling a razor, maybe we want to see it from like a lot of different angles and see it sitting in a stand. So we might want to add a carousel to that page. And maybe our component library doesn't provide that. So the designer would look at the base components that we already have and would ideally compose them together to create a carousel. So they might take a card-based component, a button-based component, and like a slider, and put them together to make a carousel. And then the developer would build it using the base components. So again, we're not building anything fully custom, but we have the opportunity to opt into another like layer of abstraction so that we aren't like forced into a system that isn't flexible enough for us. And then finally, a PM could totally decide that they want to build the whole PDP from scratch. That would make me very sad. Hopefully they don't want to do that. But what's great about this is they can still be part of the engineering and design starter kit and rewrite this whole page. So even when you want the most flexible option, you still don't have to fully eject out of the system that we're providing. So that's about all that I wanted to share. Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much. That was awesome. That was really, really cool to hear. And I think like probably like many others, I really align with that idea of the kind of different levels of components. I think that's a really nice way to kind of like take away a little bit of abstraction and kind of like call attention to those. One thing I'm actually curious about that is, do you have any ways where you kind of record that information, whether in Figma or outside, or like, do you communicate what level a certain component is, either in the name or that description?
Definitely. Yes, so in our design starter kit, it looked a lot like Mason's actually. That was very cool to see. They're pretty similar. We definitely like to say that here are the base components, here are the layout components, and we make sure that like in Figma, in our design starter kit, we use icons to represent whether or not a component is available yet in our component library. So like next to I showed that picture of the button. That button would be a base component that's available in our design system. In our design starter kit, you'd see a little forge, which is our component library, symbol next to it. And that's how a designer would know, okay, that's going to be available. It's going to be easy for the developers to use that to build this site.
That makes a lot of sense. One thing I've been seeing a lot more, and perhaps this is exactly what you're alluding to, but like using emojis in the actual component name just to let everyone know really quickly and easily, like what's overwritable, what's available, what's in sync with code, things like that. I love that. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts or practices on like documentation in general? Like, are there places where you're storing this, or like, are you turning to Figma a little bit more from that? Definitely kind of curious to learn from your perspective.
Yes, I would say that is one of the, like, when it comes to engineering, there are a lot of hard problems. I don't necessarily think that building a component library is the hard problem. It's really like organizing your thoughts and organizing the discussions and documenting the decisions, as well as like discoverability. So that's actually something that at Harry's we're like really working on. Right now, we have a lot of our components in Storybook so that our designers can see them. But I'm not sure very long. I think that we're still trying to figure out where they should go. And so actually it's true that a lot of our documentation, particularly for designers, is just directly in Figma. And now developers are starting to spend so much time in Figma and get really comfortable. So I'm hoping that more of it can move there, or at least we can figure out a place that will be the source of truth that will link out to like a source of documentation that's better for developers and better for designers. But yeah, we're not there yet.
I feel like that's always the end goal, right? But it is really interesting, you know, because like you can allow to have an instance in a design system or a design file and allow an engineer to go to that master component and see right away, like what overrides were applied, where's the documentation, where's that component kind of coming from. So I love that a lot. Well, awesome.
Yeah.
I want to thank you
I would
all
also
so much.
say quickly.
Yeah, please, Mae.
Sorry. Just to say really quickly, like the way that we build our components, we use styled components and we use them in a way that's like the design tokens can override them, but they're also like really customizable beyond that. So it's not just like, oh, you can only change like the font and border radius. You really can fully like extend the styles really in a super custom way as well.
I love that a lot. And so sorry for cutting you off there, but thank you for sharing.
No, my bad.
No worries.
Thanks.
I was just going to say thank you everyone so much for joining. This was really interesting, you know, beyond kind of like the demos and the high level approach and really get into the weeds of everything. I think this is certainly a webinar where I've learned a lot and really just appreciate all of your time for this. So thank you. It's also so good to see so much of the community here at once today. It's awesome to see all the replies in chat, and yeah, just really grateful for everyone spending the hour with us. I want to mention, following the theme of design systems, you'll be able to join us in 2 weeks where we're actually going to be talking with Jules Forrest from Credit Karma. She's going to be sharing with us how their team converged around design systems in the workplace to basically improve their design and delivery process. So I'm really excited to have her on. And again, that's in 2 weeks, and you can go to figma.com/events to see that and to register. And finally, as always, we're always taking topic suggestions. So tweet them at us, email us, send us a notarized letter, whatever you have to do to get them in. We're super curious and want to learn. So we really appreciate that. But yeah, most of all, stay safe. Thank you again, everyone, for spending that hour with us. That was a lot of fun. And thank you finally again to our panelists. We're really grateful for you and definitely learned a lot. And then the last thing I'll say is we will share out slides and the recording after. So stay tuned for that, everyone. So thank you.
So long. Thanks, everyone.